connections in the breakout room. We are now recording. So welcome to Second District PTA's auditor training at this time of mid-year audits. We heard a lot of people were interested in learning more, and so we're happy to provide this to you at our 411 Wednesday, which is some periodic meetings that we have throughout the year to address current topics. So my name is Melissa Mountain, and I'm the president of Second District PTA, and I want to welcome you all tonight and introduce Ron Rittinger, who is our former district PTA auditor. So take it away, Ron.
You're on mute, Ron.
I was trying to find his face. I couldn't find it. There
Thank
it is.
you. I'm here. Okay, I'm here. I appreciate that. So yeah, I am Ron Rittinger. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to see everybody here tonight. Thank you for spending your evening with Second District PTA, and I hope you'll learn some things and get inspired for this mid-year audit process that's now upon us. So first, here's our agenda, and we'll go through. I'll introduce myself. We had time to introduce each other in the breakout rooms, and then we'll go through some of the background about what the PTA audit is for, and then we'll walk through some of the documentation, and then we can have time for questions and answers, and have any takeaways that we need to write down and get back to folks on, and then we'll adjourn. So we'll see how efficiently we can work through this agenda. So my introduction, I am a proud SFUSD parent of a third grader at Alamo Elementary and an eighth grader at Presidio. And I have served on the PTA in a variety of capacities, including Second District Auditor most recently, but I was also president at Alamo. I was the treasurer at Alamo. I was the parliamentarian at Alamo, and I was the secretary at Alamo. So I held all of the key board positions at Alamo. And through attending trainings like this with the Second District, I learned a lot and continued to get inspired by the people that I worked with in PTA and the work that we were doing for the kids and for the community. So I want to talk about why this is so important. So the audit is something that is called for in your unit bylaws. So hopefully you've had a chance to review those. You should do that as part of the audit. The secretary at your school should have a copy of those for you to review. And in there, you'll see that the audit is a required exercise twice a year. At mid-year, where we are now, to audit the books as of 12/31, and then in the last 6 months, and then you'll do it again at the end of the school year for the period ending June 30th. So this audit is also a requirement of your insurance, and I have the insurance guide brought up here. Let me click on that. That's not it. Here it is. Sorry about that. I have so many Zoom icons up here. And I will move this. Move it over. So this is the insurance guide that's available on the CAPTA website. And in this section, it talks about the need for your organization to conduct the annual audit of financial records as a condition of the insurance. And it also talks about the monthly bank reconciliations, which are part of the audit documentation. And they need to be reviewed and signed by one or more persons. at your unit. So this is something, you know, to be aware of, because one of the great benefits of PTA is the access to this type of insurance, but we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to remain eligible. So also important for audit is, of course, fundraising transparency. By performing these audits and presenting them at your meetings, people know that people are watching where the money is going and how it's being handled by the volunteers who have stepped up to manage the PTA. So that's another bonus of the audit exercise. And finally, it's an opportunity for parent engagement. There's no shortage of things to do for PTA, of course, and at your school you may have unique needs. But this is another way that you can involve someone who may be a financial professional, or maybe someone who just wants to do something for the PTA. This is an important function and can give them a lot of ownership in the PTA. So who should perform the audit? Well, I really want to communicate tonight that anyone can do it. There's a lot of training, not only this type of training, but there's resources on the CAPTA website to give you job descriptions, things to look for, calendars. But you know, it's a parent in the community or another community member who is elected a member of the executive board or could be appointed. It depends on what's set up in your local bylaws. So the auditor will present the audit report to an audit committee who is made up of a minimum of 2 members of the association, and they should have some background in finance. And they will review the audit and sign off. So that's an extra layer of internal control to make sure that it's not being done in a vacuum and that it's getting the kind of review necessary to make everyone feel comfortable with the results. And the audit committee must review unless the audit is prepared by a qualified accountant. So if the person who volunteers to do the audit at your school is a CPA with an experience in auditing, then that person would not require the audit committee. In general, you want to have a committee to help review the audit and support the activity. So what are the deliverables and what documents will be reviewed? Well, on the CAPTA website, if you haven't found it already, there's an audit checklist. And we'll look at that, a completed checklist in a minute. But that's a great tool to help walk you through what you should be looking at. And then you can just go down and check the boxes for the different things that you want to review as part of the audit. And then the CAPTA website also provides an audit report, which we'll also look at in a minute. But in order to fill that out, you'll need the prior period audit report, a treasurer's report, bank statements for the period that you're auditing, and bank reconciliations for that period. And then the audit checklist also asks for sampling of checks, but you can zero in on larger dollar amounts so that you can verify that they were requested properly and signed off properly. And then you'll also want to review your tax returns and the Attorney General filings made by your unit. So all of that is enumerated on the audit checklist, but those are some of the primary items. So when should the mid-year audit be completed? At this time of year. It's in your bylaws when it should be presented to the executive board, generally in February, and then you can present it after the executive board meeting to the next association meeting. And then you'll want to obtain the review and sign off from the audit committee before the executive board so that everything is done. And then you can just pass it along to the board, and the same documentation can be passed along to the association. So where do you perform this audit? Well, you just work independently, but you need to have a good relationship with your treasurer so that you can obtain all of the documentation and or the financial secretary. And then they should have everything that you need And then you can work with that, and any gaps that they may have or things that they cannot provide, then you can make a note of that. And that would be something, a recommendation that you would put in your audit report. And then, of course, you want to retain your work papers for the subsequent auditor so that they can pick up where you left off and kind of follow your roadmap for what's to be done. And that's generally a good practice for anything in PTA. So we want to always be thinking about who's coming next and how we can empower them to be successful in their role. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to show the Second District's mid-year audit report and walk through some of the documentation. Okay, so this is the Second District's audit report. Let me make this. I'm just trying to make it larger, but my button is hidden behind the Zoom thing. Bear with me. Oh, here we go. Okay. That's better. So here you can see the completed audit report. It's dated at the time that it was performed and lists out the IRS employer ID, which you should see in your bylaws, and the bank account information. So each bank account that your unit has requires a separate page. So you can see here, this is the Second District's PTSA account, and there's a small balance here. So I think this is the holding account. So it looks like this account is just holding some dollars. I can't see the, yeah, PTSA hold too. So these are dollars that the PTA at the Second District is holding for maybe an expired unit or something. So there's a small dollar amount here. So this one was easy for them, but it shows the period that's being audited. And then it begins with the balance at the end of the last audit. So you'll take this number from the prior audit report. And then you'll take the receipts. And this comes from the treasurer's report. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the treasurer's report that was used for this audit, but that should be something similar to your reports that you get at the association meetings that will show you the receipts during the period and then the disbursements during the period, because you'll plug in the total amount of receipts on this line and then add that to the prior balance. And then here, you'll enter the disbursements in the period, and then you'll have your balance on hand. I'm going to scroll down to the operating account for the Second District so you get a more real world view here. So this is the, this is not the operating account. This is a scholarship account. So I'll keep going.
What?
When he was door one day, there was the kind of grade where he was able to go back.
Okay, this is the business checking account for the Second District. So here you can see this is the balance at the end of the last audit. And then these 33,000 was receipts added there. And then the disbursements. And then you get down to the balance on hand. So then this is when you'll work with the bank reconciliation. And in this section, you take the statement from the bank statement balance at the end of the period, which would be 12/31 for the mid-year audit. And then you have to take from the bank reconciliation items that are not yet credited at the bank, but may have been booked in your PTA EZ or whatever accounting software you're using. And so that will be a reconciling item. And then in this section, you'll have your uncleared checks. So I can share the bank reconciliation of the second district to show where those come from.
And if anyone has any questions as he's going along, you feel free to enter those in the chat and we'll alert him.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So here's a bank reconciliation, and this is from PTA EZ. And in this section, you can take the these are the cleared checks and then cleared receipts, and then it will show you the uncleared deposited receipts. So that's the 1998 that we saw in the audit report. And we saw that there were 0 uncleared checks. So using the bank reconciliation is really critical to this filling out this form, because this will get you to balance to what you have in the top section of the report. And then here's an example of the board financial report. So this is not as preferable as a treasurer's report. Treasurer's report can also be run from PTA EZ, but this just shows the balances that you should be seeing in your bank recons. And you can also test the receipts. Now this will only show receipts in the, well, you can look at the year-to-date in this section and then work your way back to the treasurer's report, or take just from the treasurer's report and enter that onto the audit form. So going back to the audit form, once we have used the bank recon to pick up the uncleared deposits or any uncleared checks, then that will take you to the actual account balance. So you can see how this line will balance to this line, and those are both starred. So I will stop there and look in the chat if there are any questions, or feel free to speak up. Are PayPal accounts considered bank accounts? Do they require their own audit form? That's a great question. And yes, they are. In fact, the second district has a PayPal account. Right here. And this got its own audit page. In fact, we can see the 1998 here. So this means that it's been booked in the books, but this hasn't been transferred to the business checking account. So it's a deposit in transit. So yes, if you have a PayPal account, it's considered another bank account, because that's money that's been collected by the PTA, though it may not have been recorded yet in the accounting software. Is there somewhere I can see an example of a treasurer report? Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get one in advance of this meeting, but I can send one out after the meeting perhaps, and then we can send it to this group and they can see that from PTA EZ.
And Ron, I think I can also drop one as sample in the chat, actually,
Oh, you have
to
one,
be
good,
more,
okay.
yeah. Just
Yeah, I
from
was-
California PTA's website has samples of all of these forms as well. And we've shared out the report form as well as the checklist. And I can put a sample treasurer's report as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Our last audit was done 2 years ago. Are we only required to do the last 6 months? If so, do we just indicate, oh, sorry, the balance on hand from the audit 2 years ago? Well, preferably you want to go back and audit the periods in between, but that may not be practical. So I would pick up the balance from the beginning of the period that you are responsible for. So from 7/1, 2021, and take the balance from the bank statement. And then you should be able to pick up the balance from the accounting software and use those on the form. Terry, I don't know if you have any other feedback on that question where there's a large gap in between audits.
Yeah, I actually just heard from California PTA on this question, so you're not the only one to ask, but they do recommend if it's many years that's missing, to start with the one that would be most recent and then work your way back, because that would be what's most important in order to make sure that your insurance is covered if there were an issue.
Okay,
And
good.
Terry always has wisdom to share if there's anything to add. So.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. But that's basically the exercise, is to take each bank account and work with the bank statements and recons, fill out the form, and then make sure that these two numbers are in balance. So I also can scroll down finally to the checklist. So this is also available on the CAPTA website as part of the auditor's package of documents. And then so you just want to go through and look for all of these documents, make sure that they're available for you. And like I said, if anything is not, then you'll need to point that out to the treasurer that that's something that's required. And then you can make recommendations in this section for that or on a separate page. But you'll want to be looking at things, not only the bank reconciliation, but the tax returns, the AG forms, like we mentioned, also all the bank statements, membership reports. Here, this wasn't really relevant for the second district, but it would be at your unit. And then you want to see all the meeting minutes to make sure that disbursements that were made were approved. And then for deposits, you'll look for cash verification forms. Income received matches deposits in the checkbook register. And then you want to see that the treasurer reports were filed with the association at every meeting and disclosed. And then any committee reports for fundraisers especially. And then the audit reports from the prior periods. So it seems like a lot, but the treasurer should have all of this information. And to look at it, it's pretty straightforward once you get it in front of you. And then I'll just go back to those large checks as a additional test. So you may have a lot of expenditures to be reviewing. That's why I say you could focus on the largest, maybe pick 5 of the largest ones and then review the documentation for those. If you have time to do all, that's ideal, but I just want to mention sometimes people are intimidated by that. How am I going to review all of these? Just focus in on the larger ones and then you can get some pretty good assurance that things are being done the way they should be. I'll look back in the chat.
Yeah, Ron, there was a specific question. I'm not absolutely certain, and I wonder if you or Terry knows. It's the one about if someone needs to do, say, 2 different periods of an audit, can they just put that into one, or do they have to do 2 separate ones?
I haven't encountered that. I would say, so they're saying they need to audit the full year rather than just the 6 months?
For example, if they needed to audit spring of 2021 and fall of 2021,
Oh, I
could
see
they
now,
just?
okay. I would do 2 separate audits.
Right,
Because-
those are 2 separate years. So
Exactly, yeah.
you'd have to do two audits for that.
Yeah, I could see doing 1 audit for 1 fiscal year, but in this case, yeah, you're over 2 fiscal years, so you would want to do 2 separate audits.
I agree with Ron on that point too.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So the audit checklist is a great document to look at when people take office. Yeah, that's a great point. In addition to reviewing the bylaws, when you get someone on board in the treasurer role, this really helps them keep an eye out for what they should be looking for and completing. Thank you, Michelle. How do we find out what audits are missing, outstanding? Well, yeah, when you complete your audit, you should send it into the second district because we are collecting those for the units. So you can send an email to the treasurer or the district auditor, and she can look in the files and see what we have. And then you'll want to check with your historian or your president at your school and see what they have in their files.
Ron, that process has been sort of timed out. Now on PTEZ, there is a document section that all the units have access to.
Oh, okay.
And they're requested to upload their audit to that, and it goes into the database that is maintained by California PTA.
Okay.
They can always re-download it at different times. So they're required to put their tax returns and their audit report and treasurer's report and so forth. There's a list, and they just essentially send a PDF up.
Oh, okay. That's great. Yeah, that creates all in one place.
And we will be sending you reminders about uploading to my PTEZ. And if people are having trouble accessing that online system, you can reach out to Second District PTA or specifically to our treasurer, Sheila. And I did put her email into the chat.
Thank you. Are there specific audit deadlines? Well, they should be listed in your bylaws when it should be completed and presented to the association.
The whole purpose of the bylaw or the audit is to raise any issues as soon as possible. And so the audit for the year, most units will have half-year audit, mid-year audit as of the 31st of December. And so the audit ought to be to the board, executive board, in the February meeting and at the next general meeting following the executive board. And because if there's a problem, you want to get on top of it. So the year-end audit should be available to present to the board and the association meeting in September, October at the latest, because I mean, if you're having trouble getting it done by then, you've got a problem. And people ought to recognize that it is a problem if it's not coming through very quickly after the close of the period.
Right, that's a great point. So even though the deadlines are in the bylaws, it's even, you want to adhere to those as close as you can so you can identify things early. Does each school submit forms like RF1, Attorney General's info statement, and IRS 990? Yes. Each school should be registered with the IRS and the Attorney General, so there are filing requirements for those. The RRF one, Terry, remind me, is that the raffle form?
No, the RRF is the district. It's the registration with the Attorney General,
Okay, so every school would have that.
right? They have to have that filed each year.
Mhm.
There are two raffle reports, one for the year at the end of the year, and one at the beginning of the year for any scheduled or anticipated raffles to be held during the year. So that's kind of crazy, but that's what it is. And
Yeah,
they
that's
got-
the way they do that, yeah.
yeah. So at the most units finish their year on the 30th of June. That would be the time to do the year-end audit report, or I mean, the year-end raffle report. Actually, it runs through September, I think, for that group. And then also do the one for the next year, if you anticipate having an audit. And yeah, there's other things you can know, but that's the rules are, the recommendations are there. And if you have any questions, you should definitely ask Second District Treasurer to help you
Yeah.
out on those questions.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Melissa, for putting these contacts in the chat so people can see where they can reach out and get support if they need it. What specific months are considered spring and fall? Well, most schools' fiscal years are ending June 30th. So the spring would be January through June and fall would be July through December. Oh, thanks, Michelle. What's way ahead of me there?
It's still good to just go over them verbally because we are recording. So, for people to hear the questions and answers is great also.
And then, yeah, here's a really helpful link to get familiar with what the tax filings that are required.
Ron, I gotta go.
Okay,
So-
well, thanks, Terry, for your input. Always helpful.
Thanks,
And-
Terry.
I just want to cover Susan's question here. Is it enough to know that many of the files are available on cloud, or should we need them, or do we need to pull everything on the file and keep it together? Well, if you want to store things electronically, I believe that Melissa, is that permitted? Do they have to print out for their records, or can they store it online?
Digital documentation is now allowed. Finally, they have caught up with the technology world, so it is okay to keep them. You don't need to print everything out in a binder any longer.
Great.
But it just might be helpful to yourselves just to have one place where they're linked all together. But digital documentation is perfectly great.
Right. And I would say, yeah, if you wanted to print or assemble in one digital spot, some of the key documents to make it easier for your audit committee to review, that would be good. All right, I've worked my way through all of the questions and, oh, Rebecca, thank you. No, the auditor needs to be a separate person. As particularly cannot be the financial secretary because they are helping process all the funds and create the material that you'll be auditing. So it should be another parent outside of those board positions.
Yeah, those board positions aren't good, but there might be a case where there's a board member that is not a financial person, officer role, and is also not living in the same household as the treasurer or related by blood to the treasurer. So if there is, another appointed board member, just say it's the parliamentarian and they're not related to the financial people, then they could serve on that audit committee.
Right. Yeah, I would say it's not just anyone that isn't a check signer. It would need to be someone who's, like Melissa said, removed from the financial activity and doesn't have any connections.
There was one question I thought wanted to get back to. It was just kind of more general, but it was from Jennifer. What exactly do you have to do to review? I think maybe, do you want to expand on that question? Or I think it's just, that you would want the second person, that's the committee member that's signing off, to also have, looked everything over. So the review, if you're going to sign your name, that you'd want to feel comfortable that you, checked, went ahead and checked everything off that list.
Yeah, I can expand on the question
Okay.
because we have an auditor. He already spent several hours checking all the documentation, making sure everything lines up with the financial records and everything. So that's a lot of work. We used to just have that auditor present it to the board and they would review it. So now that there's this new audit committee, we have to have additional people specifically on the audit committee. Are they expected to do the same amount of work that he did and look at all these checks and all these records themselves each? Or are they just basically doing what the board used to do and just make sure that the forms are all filled out and that he's, checked off all the boxes, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say it's that because it's not requiring a second and third audit. It's just to review to make sure that all the forms have been completed, that they tie out. So those two check figures match. And that the checklist has been prepared. And also maybe to check against the latest bank reconciliation to confirm those outstanding checks and deposits. I think that would be sufficient.
And I believe that newer addition of having the committee, it may have come down from the insurance company. Not 100% sure, but I'm kind of remembering that. So some of these rules are just PTA rules. Some of these are nonprofit rules, and some of these things are just kind of imposed by insurance company that the PTA works with.
Mhm.
Okay, understood.
Okay. I know that some schools were just having trouble recruiting an actual volunteer as auditor. And one idea was to possibly share auditors between schools. So for example, if one PTA wants to do the audit for a different PTA and kind of flip-flop between schools and auditors, that they could share. So if that's something that people are interested in, at the district, we would like to just kind of collect that information, or you can make a connection here. Or if you have an auditor that is a paid auditor, some units will just require a paid auditor in some cases. If you have one that has worked well for you, we can collect a list of those people and provide that. So anyone's interested in sharing auditors between schools, just let us know. And that's correct. Someone just wanted to confirm in the chat that if you use a CPA or a paid or volunteer as an auditor, you would not need the committee. You don't need the second or the person to qualify as a committee. Just that one person qualifies as the auditor. And I'm not sure what a standard fee for people. Is there anyone that has had a paid auditor recently and has had to pay the fee for that? I'm not hearing any, so I'm not sure what a typical fee is these days for that. And the question about, that's a good question. The auditor has an inactive CPA license. Does that count? That is something I don't know the answer to. I don't know if Ron would know, but that's something that I can definitely check with California PTA on. And we can include that in a future newsletter, or Jennifer, if you want to email me if that's a situation that you're having personally in your PTA, you can email me about that and we can work it out and I can get the information for you. another just kind of interesting fact is that we're using this term auditor and an audit, and the official accountancy organization has reached out to PTA and asked us to change that. So while we're talking about auditors and audits, this will actually eventually be changed because it's not a technical audit, it's a review really. And so you'll probably start hearing us change that language and see the language on California PTA's website updated to something along the lines of financial review, a financial reviewer, I'm not really sure, but a lot of the technical accountant people were upset that PTA was calling it an audit because it's not a technical audit in the accountancy world. So.
Well, with about 4 minutes to go, are there any other questions before we wrap up and adjourn? No? Oh,
Does sharing of an auditor with another school or CPA still need to be appointed by the president or ratified? Sorry. Yes, that I don't have any water. Yes, that should be still appointed or ratified. And we will definitely send out the link to this recording.
yeah, I hope well, the information that was shared tonight was helpful, and that folks are aware of the resources available not only on CAFTA, but at the Second District. So as you're working through this, please reach out and either, I can help, Melissa can put me in touch, or you can talk with Annie, who's the current auditor at the Second District.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for offering to support, and hope you all feel like you have lots of different resources to accomplish your mid-year audits.
Yeah, and thank you all for making time for this and for making time for your PTA. All right, with that, I'll wish you all a good evening and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.